Every business owner hits the same wall. You can't grow without the hire. You can't afford the hire without the growth. And I stared at that wall for months. And then on the Saturday before Easter, not too long ago, I ended up on the concrete floor of my basement at midnight, building something I'd never built before. By morning, it was alive. What happened over the next 90 days changed everything. I almost kept it to myself. Nope, 4 episodes, no polish, the whole truth. Welcome. This is the story of scale. Hey guys, welcome back to the story of scale. We are here in a special format. I feel like we're all watching like a news station right now, and someone just piped in and said, hey, we're here to interrupt with some breaking news. But there's been some regularly scheduled programming. Chad, you and I have been having some amazing conversations about the story of scale, what it looks like to scale a business, how what we mean by scale is different from what the average person in the marketplace means by scale, honoring all the tension between creativity and commerce. We've had some amazing conversations so far, and we have some amazing conversations in the pipeline. And not that this conversation isn't also amazing, but we're like, hey, we don't even have time to get into the studio because we can't wait to tell people about this. And so they might have figured a lot of it out. I kind of showed the cards in the intro there in the first few seconds, but what are we talking about in these next few episodes?
Yeah, well, the 2 letters that probably is seeping into everyone's ecosystem, whether you like it or not, is AI. And I've been wanting to do this over the last couple of weeks because what we've done here at Astoria is pretty incredible in the AI space. And I really I was just like, we have to be sharing because you've been so busy traveling the world, doing some stuff, entrepreneurs organization, things like that. You haven't even been sharing on social media what you've been doing behind the scenes. And I'm like, man, I wish you would just like, when you're up at 2 a.m. and you're wrestling through some of the stuff you're doing, you need to be sharing this. And so we said, well, the medium, we probably need to do this. Let's sit down and have some conversations on the podcast because, scale is something that business owners are wrestling with and want. And I think I forget which episode, but we talked about, what's the hire, hiring. And what's beautiful now in this world, and this is kind of the focus of episode 1 is, do you hire too soon? Do you hire too late? Do we hire once the revenue can justify this hire, or do we hire because this person can bring in revenue? And a lot of times, especially I always call it that $500K to $3 million squeeze, is typically it's a marketing role. It's a specialized potentially copywriter or a web developer, depending your type of business. It's a typically highly specialized, competitive person that is requiring a lot of money, for a small business, whether it's 70 to 100 base plus opportunity or smaller base, larger opportunity, and can be really challenging to justify that out of the gate. And some people are willing to take risks, and small businesses are typically bootstrapped. We don't have Silicon Valley money. A lot of us don't have, where it's like, hey, here's $10 million, and your goal is to spend it over the next 90 days, which is like crazy, how VCs work. And all of a sudden, you spend through that in 90 days. And so there were jobs. We're sitting in our quarterly planning retreat, and we're like, hey, here's the hires we want to make. And both you and I are early adopters and playing around with AI. That we said, hey, can we build an agent? And you and I have dabbled and played around, not dabbled. We actually done a lot more than dabble. That's just the word to say. Stay up all night playing, vibe coding, doing whatever. But it became a passion. Every morning we'd be like, hey, what'd you do last night? We'd start talking about it. And Claude Cowork, Perplexity Computer, all the things that you hear a lot of that are, but it takes up your own computing power, right? And so we started being like, well, I think I was just like, hey, I'm looking at building an agent. But doing on a Mac Mini, and Mac Minis were sold out. And, with like 2 hours later, like, hey, I found one in Best Buy and I'm driving down to go get one right now. And I think the next day you had agents. And we had this. And so I'd love to just, hear kind of that, like, what did it feel like buying that Mac Mini, the excitement? And, I think you even drove in your new Cybertruck, but we won't talk about that, down to get the Mac Mini. And then the feeling of like, man, what am I going to create? Even a little bit of the process, the soul file, the memory file, kind of the architecture it takes to create an agent. And then what
Yeah.
was the first agent you created and why?
Oh man, I mean, you're jumping right to it, and I'm already feeling the tension, which is kind of the theme of this whole podcast in the first place. We talked all about tension in the very first episode. So
Yeah.
like even before I answer that question, I feel like I have to name that tension. Is that okay? Can I
Hmm.
just like
Yeah,
name it
please. Yeah.
so I feel like a peace of mind about it? And that is, dude, this topic is polarizing, and had no idea that it would be as polarizing as it has become. And I think the last 90 days has been insane. Yes, in part due to my calendar, like you mentioned, but some of it is like, it's not just that I don't have time to like give people the behind the scenes look that I usually like giving them into my journey as an entrepreneur. Yes, I haven't had the time, but also like talking about this stuff makes me nervous because
Mm.
there's so much rage in the marketplace right now. And the moment that you come out with content like this and show people what you're doing, they put you in a box and you're like, oh, you're one of those guys. You're one of the
Hmm.
guys that build the data center next to the zoo and destroy the environment and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Thinking that you have a Cybertruck. So you're also probably a horrible
Oh.
human being. So as someone whose skin is not quite as thick as yours, the tension that I want to name is like, dude, I've been wrestling with all of it
Mm.
internally
Yep.
and with friends. And
Hmm.
where I've landed is the stuff that we're talking about over the course of this sort of bonus series on this podcast, if you will, is that this is actually solving for some of the tension that I feel. One of the reasons that I
Hmm.
was so excited about getting an agent is if you look at it outside of the perspective of AI, I'm a very mission driven entrepreneur, which means when I show up in the world to do my work, yes, because I'm a business owner, like Disney said, I make movies to make money so I can make more movies, which
Hmm.
means I've got to care about the bottom line. Cash flow is like oxygen to the business. Otherwise, I go out of business and the infinite game ends. Right.
Hmm. Yep. Yep.
And yet, it's not what drives me. I'm not showing up going, how do I make more money? I'm showing up going, how do I make a bigger difference? The thing that keeps me
Hmm.
up at night is problems in the world that I want to solve. And I think that business is one of the most effective vehicles to try to solve some of them. And so
Hmm.
imagine what it feels like. And this, I would hope that this probably speaks to some of the hesitation of people listening in who are skeptical. But what if I feel the tension of all the things that people are talking about? How do I still embrace it? And how did you get there? And one, I
Hmm.
would say AI concerns, environmental stuff, ethics aside, AI is playing a role in helping us make a bigger difference in the world. And our
Hmm.
team is having a bigger impact because it's increasing our productivity. It is not eliminating jobs for us.
Hmm.
Ironically, a hiring spree,
More work. Yeah.
and we have more agents than ever because it's creating more
Yeah.
opportunity, more productivity, which is allowing us to make more cash and give that cash to more humans. So
Hmm.
that's one thing. Two, we're making a bigger difference. So even if AI were neutral, it is allowing us to make a bigger difference in the world, which I think, you hear a lot of companies like, yeah, we're damaging the environment in what we do, but we're carbon neutral by this year. It's not
Hmm.
exactly apples to apples, but like, okay, yes, we're using AI heavily and we're also making a difference in the world that
Yeah.
solves some of those problems, right? So that's thing number one. Thing number two is I think Agentic can actually, even though it's more active, as we're going to talk about, there are ways in which it is more efficient. You can run
Hmm.
a Python script with an agent on a cron in a way where typically you'd go have to use more API tokens and more computing power. And
Okay,
so,
I'm going to stop you there. So
yeah,
I think it's important, like define agentic for people. I know it's a buzzword, and not everyone knows it. People say it like they know what it means. And then
yeah,
even a cron, I think that's like because I think workflow and agentic's important. Even before we jump in, I think it's just like let's stop
yeah,
there and just kind of rather than insider baseball terms, let's just assume people don't
sure.
know what those are.
Yeah, that's smart. That's smart. And I'm just grateful that you kind of nudged us to create this series as a container for these conversations so we can process through some of this together. But
Hmm.
as we started helping clients implement AI and serving other entrepreneurs from this place of experience that we're getting very quickly, their resistance was, "Well, isn't this bad for these reasons?" And I'm like, "Okay, a cron is a recurring task or an SOP, so to speak, that you can assign
Hmm.
to an agent and give them to do without you." So I'm sure all the computer science nerds listening in who are also entrepreneurs they're going to facepalm when they hear me say this because they're like, Harris, that is not at all what it is. But the best way to help people wrap their mind around agentic AI, in my opinion, is okay, you want someone to do this task. You've delegated it, right? Okay, in AI world, that's called a cron. But how does that cron get executed? Imagine a large language model. So for those of us who have interacted with ChatGPT or a Claude or a Gemini, Perplexity, I think the best way to think about that, again, oversimplification. So there's lots of asterisks here, but someone has taken a massive library of books written by really smart people, put them into a large language model, and given you an interface so that you can interact with that library rapidly.
Hmm.
So it's like
Yep.
being able to sit down and talk to someone with a name like Claude and saying, "Hey, Claude, what about?" And is like, "Oh," and they can instantly go to the library, pull the book, do the research, and then
Hmm.
come back and go, "Use this," right?
Yep.
But what happens if I don't want to sit in front of the computer and interact with that library?
Hmm.
Well, I need a human typically to go do the research. And then I need to equip that human with, in the imagination age, equip them with AI, AKA a large
Hmm.
language model. But what if I can't afford to hire that human? Well, I think an easy way to think about an AI agent is to picture a robot that has had a large language model like Gemini or ChatGPT or Claude installed as its brain, but they can literally sit at a computer and move the mouse around and do anything on that computer that a human could do. So if I'm like, hey, Chad, can you put together an outline for a marketing promo series for us on this offer that we're rolling out? And you're like, sure. And you open a writing tool or a browser window and start a new Google Doc and you start typing. So imagine an invisible person sitting at a computer being able to open the doc and start writing, and then opening another tab and doing some research, and then clicking on Notion app or Evernote or
Hmm.
something like that and copy and pasting it over.
And it has all the context of your business and all the
Correct.
things.
They've already
Yep.
been trained, they've been onboarded. And so an AI agent could do anything a robot could do if it had a hand and a brain sitting at a desk interacting on a computer.
Yep.
That's the simplest way to understand it. So
Yep.
if we start
I
from
always like
that,
to say reactive versus proactive. Like you can give it a process or a cron direction, and it can be proactive for you.
correct.
Versus, you have to be in front of Claude, you have to be in front of ChatGPT to be, reactive, and that tool is working. And then you still have to do something. I remember when I first started using ChatGPT, and I was like building a proposal. I'm like, can't this just like go create and send a Google Doc and then give me the link? Whereas now an agent can do that. And then Claude's got some things now where you can do it too. But at first
Mhm.
it didn't. And I was just like, man, can you just do that? And
Yes,
now it can and more.
it can. Yeah. So then imagine walking into an office building and on the floor there's 100 cubicles, and every single cubicle has a computer and a robot with the Claude brain that we're already used to installed. So it already knows how to think. It understands how to interact with humans with language that we understand. And it can leverage that computer to go do anything that a human with the same skills can do on that computer. That's
Hmm.
essentially agentic AI. And that gets pretty exciting when you don't, because robot sounds expensive and intimidating.
Hmm.
The robot's invisible. It's all software. It's just an operating, and the robot can be using a computer that you give it, aka this is where all the Mac Mini craze started. It doesn't have to be a Mac Mini. It's just that was the cheapest entry point in the marketplace because you don't need a keyboard, it doesn't need a mouse, it doesn't need, because it's installed in the operating system. And so it's like cool, for 500 bucks, someone could go give their agent a computer, which is what it needs to be able to work for them.
Yeah.
But now what
And a
we're seeing,
Mac Mini, you kind of own the data, privacy, security. That's a big reason too for certain types of businesses.
yeah, yeah. So I know we want to get to like more in the weeds and talking about the agents, but that was what happened first was Mac Mini, and we can even tell the story of that moment, the origin story of what happened and what it was like. But then my second agent, I didn't go buy a second Mac Mini. I was like, huh. So if the power goes out at my house, this agent can't run on that computer. But then there's the security thing. Let's keep experimenting. Let's let the second experiment be in the cloud because now there's going to be more uptime and I can interact with it more easily remotely. Now I've got
Mhm.
systems set up where I can interact with the Mac Mini that's in my basement in the other room from anywhere in the world. So that's
Mhm.
not as much of an issue as long as it's powered on.
Yeah,
But then we started getting into cloud-based agents, but you've got to give them a computer, whether it's a server or a Mac. Yeah.
totally. Yeah. So I love that tease, especially knowing the second one, because the second one came right after the first one. But let's come back to like, that the excitement of powering up powering up the Mac Mini, like what you did to even like choose what agent you were going to do first. Because I think there's also, we've really doubled down on specialization. The agents that
Yeah.
are most powerful is specialization. There's some people out there. It's like, hey, build this super agent that does everything for you.
Mhm.
You and I are both against that. We've tested it. There's reasons why. Um, I'm sure you'll talk a little bit about that, but kind of get us back to the first agent and the creation and
Yeah.
summarize kind of how that was and even the feeling of it.
Yeah. Well, it started with experimenting with agentic AI in general, like Claude Cowork, for example,
Hmm.
or
Hmm.
other tools that people had built. I remember even like a year or a year and a half ago, there was a startup called Centra, and they created these little cartoon-like characters that you could, but you had to go to a browser, log in, give them
Hmm.
lots of input on what to do and train them. And then you could kind of disappear and they would do stuff for you, but you had to keep logging in to come back and check on them. And so in the early days, I started wrapping my mind around this shift from, oh, I can interact with this LLM, large language model, or I can build an agent. As things started getting really exciting. And then I drug my feet. A couple, you were one of those two people, Andre, my good friend Andre, who actually owns Socially Used Studios that we typically record this podcast in. You were the two who were just we were the three of us were just constantly talking about it with each other on calls. And yeah, you and I were talking one day or texting one day, and you're like, I think I'm just going to go get a Mac Mini, but I can't find one. They're all sold out. And I was like, I've been wanting to. My buddy Andre has been trying to get me to. He found two old Mac Minis he had laying around the studio, and he also owns a software company, so he has the benefit of having some developers. And he was just constantly telling me about these things that they were doing. I was like, I got to do this. I got to do this. So on that particular day, I was like, I'm just going to go for it. And so I couldn't find the cheap Mac Mini. I had to buy one of the more expensive ones that had more RAM or whatever, which was completely unnecessary. But I was
Yeah.
just tired of waiting.
Yeah.
And for like the 60 days before that, every team meeting, every week, I was like, guys, we've got to find an enterprise AI solution.
Hmm.
We've got to find an enterprise AI solution. Because at the time we had different team members trying to like share Claude accounts because I had like perfect little projects built, things that were already trained in my voice that they didn't have access to. And that got awkward because we were getting booted or kicked out. And then there's like, man, I was just having a conversation with ChatGPT about this rash on the inside of my leg. And now my assistant's in there and that feels weird, right? Like the
Yeah.
privacy stuff. And so I'm like, we've got
Yeah.
to figure out this enterprise thing. And that was the thing that pushed me over the edge. I was like, let's just do it. It's going to be hard. Let's just do it.
Yeah.
So I go, I drive, I pick it up, I bring it back home. And I remember it was Easter weekend and it was the Saturday between Good Friday and Easter. And I told Kate, my wife, and she's also part of our team, was like, okay, are you good with me disappearing for the next at least like 4 to 6 hours? And dude, it was painful, but
Yeah.
I installed the first agent on the Mac Mini. And I still remember building the Slack app. Her name is Vesper. And I was doing all the instructions, constant trial and error, wasn't working. And I was like, hi, Vesper, are you there? And then the little, like, it's as if you were texting somebody and the little bubble pops up where you can see that they're typing. And
Yeah.
it goes, basically like, hi, you must be Harris. Tell me more about who I am. And like a lot of first times in life, it's one of those first time experiences that's hard to put into words. And I'm not
Hmm.
trying to sound dramatic, but it's like this, it's kind of a
Yeah.
bizarre feeling, like waking up this thing that you sort of gave life to. And so it's a powerful technology. Um, you've got to be careful with it, but that was an exciting day and we were off to the races.
I love it. Talk a little bit about, I know, just cognizant of time,
Mm-hmm.
like, so there's obviously the technical side, but
Mm-hmm.
really where the magic happens is, the way that the soul file and the memory file. What give us a
Yeah.
little example of those two things? So that's really where kind of the art form of, creating the agent, giving the agent guardrails, what the agent can do, can't do.
Yeah.
Um, Walk us through that a little bit.
Yeah, I think there's you spoke really well to specialization and how we're both in alignment on that. That's something that everyone listening in has to think about and recognize, and that's where I see a lot of mistakes being made. There's so
Mhm.
many like AI gurus popping up in my Instagram feed, and I grit my teeth at a lot of it.
Mhm.
Or like they're just blindly trying to sell stuff to strangers on the internet, and so they show off what they've built and make it seem really easy. So it's like comment with the word Jarvis, and I'll show you how to build this. And I'm like, dude, I promise you, the average person is not going to be able to do that on their own. It
Yeah.
is requires
Yeah.
an extraordinary amount of resilience. And so the idea of building a super agent I don't recommend for two reasons. One, you already named specialization is key. And the second is security. Dude, we're in the Wild West right now with this technology. There
Mhm.
really are very real concerns around that. And so we have a lot of agents now, in part because as our risk tolerance grows and as things get more secure, we give each agent a little bit more access to different things. But I got hacked like 12 years ago.
I
And
remember that. Gosh,
yeah,
that was awful.
it was everything, right? Because once it had access to email, it was able to reroute servers because it logged in my GoDaddy account, controlled my domain names, changed my website to a porn site, got into my social media accounts, started messaging people asking for money and stuff. And then it logged into our digital contracts platform and started pulling my signature to sign like loan documents and was trying to borrow money from banks. So like I had to reset everything in my life. It took over my life for like 2 weeks. So part of it is specialization, but the other part of that specialization comes with the bonus of more security because agents are really good at collaborating with each other. And so we just
Mhm.
create handoffs. And some people find that annoying, but the upside is I'm going to give this agent access to this platform, and I'm going to give this agent access to this platform, and a third agent access to this platform instead of one agent to all three. So if
Totally.
one of those servers gets hacked or one of those agents goes rogue, it causes a little bit of damage, but that damage is controlled and
Mhm.
sealed off, so to speak, and so we can minimize it. And that's
Yeah.
that's
So
what I got.
I'll add a third one that I think is huge is
Mhm.
memory. So
Yeah.
there's nothing more frustrating than all of a sudden being like you're working with your agent and then the agent just like totally forgets the stuff that it's doing. But if it's doing too many things, that's
Yes.
bound to happen.
Yeah.
It's why if you're in a long one thread with Claude or Chat GPT and all of a sudden it just went rogue.
Yeah.
The memory and looking at developing these tools that I've been doing, talking to developers, that's one of the hardest things to do. And so if you
Yes.
expect, just like a human, if you expect the human to remember everything, at some
Mhm.
point it's not going to be able to, and it's going to start like its brain's going to become fried.
Yep.
And so that's I would say a third one is just the memory and all of
I have a
that.
really recent specific example of that that's pretty quick to explain. I have an agent named Lewis. I decided I wanted to build a council of people because AI is biased towards affirmation and agreement unless you train it not to be. And so I love the idea of multiple agents with different specialization because when they're collaborating with each other, there's almost this devil's advocacy that kicks in and they like
Mhm.
question each other and then they do better work even when the humans aren't involved just because someone nudged them to. So one of the most recent agents I built, his name is Lewis, named after C.S. Lewis. And when I first built Lewis, I made him a part of a council, which is a private channel that's just me and 4 AI agents. And Vesper, the first agent I ever built, runs all of my call transcripts every day and gives Lewis access to them. And at the end of the day, he reviews them all. And one of his primary jobs is to protect me from my blind spots and hold me accountable to the kind of person I want to be. So to do that, I was like, okay, I have a faith background.
Mhm.
I was like, I want this agent to be like knowledgeable of like theological authors, deep thinkers that I respect. And we started with
Philosophers. Yeah.
that category. And then that was how I originally built him. And then I was like, let's expand this a bit. I also really like Stoicism, and there's some cool practices in there. Let's borrow some cool stuff from Stoicism. Actually, man, you would also be really good as like a seasoned executive coach. If you were like a CEO whisperer, but through this spiritual lens and practice, hey, go read all of John Maxwell's leadership books and include that in the way you approach things. And dude, within 3 adaptations, Lewis started getting less effective because there was conflict. Stoicism and Christianity is not the same thing.
Yeah.
And what a CEO would do to be effective as a leader that's trying to protect shareholder value
Hmm.
hopefully often aligns with the teachings of Jesus, for example, but sometimes those things are in conflict with each other. And an
Hmm.
agent doesn't have the human instinct that allows you to navigate it. So
Hmm.
it's just a great example of specialization and how I already started making the mistake, and it got watered down and it became less effective. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So true. Well, we were able to touch on Vesper.
Hmm.
I know that led to like immediately creating, two more. Can you just do a high cursory? Because next episode we're going to jump into like now that we have 27 agents, we're actually going to like go deeper on these other two. So we're not going to spend a ton of time, but just as a tease as to like why did you go to these next two, and then what's the like thing that they should be thinking about, not just another tool. Because I think up to this point, what we're saying is probably most people are using AI as a tool, or like we don't need another tool, we don't need another prompt. A lot of us, especially as business owners, we need additional help, support, people, some people we can delegate to, but we don't necessarily
Hmm.
have the resources to. And that's why agents are so powerful. That's why we're talking about it. So tell us a little bit about these other two that, the next that followed Vesper, and then
Yeah.
we'll close
Well,
out the episode.
it's kind of funny. And I want to make sure we save time to talk about this next because even though, yes, we're saying, hey, you now have the opportunity to build a team, even if you don't have the resources, what I've been noticing and coaching other entrepreneurs is like when we talk to them about that, they have these limiting beliefs and blinders on where they cannot even see the opportunity
Mm-hmm.
because our brains have been trained to not even be able to explore it because the possibility has not been real. And so we've got to
Hmm.
unpack that a little bit further. And as that started hitting me, and I mean, you guys have been incredible at even nudging me in this, like, hey, think about this, think about this. I'm like, well, we
Hmm.
can't afford to have, and we can't. I'm like, oh, wait a second, we can just spin up another agent. Um, this is funny to me now, and it shows that limited thinking is the agents I built after Vesper were Vance and Vera, uh, all of which start with V's because I thought, oh, that'll be cool. We'll just distinguish the difference between a human and an agent on our team because we'll just give them all V names. And
Yeah.
then very quickly I realized, oh, this is dumb. Like we're going to run out of V's and this is going to be so confusing because I thought we were just going to have three. I thought we were just going to have one. And I was like, oh, no, we're going to have three. Actually,
Yeah.
you know
Yeah.
what? No, you guys aren't even prepared for this. Give us a couple of months and we're going to have like five. I know that sounds hard to believe. And then now here we are with 27. So now we
Yeah.
have Leo, who's named after Leonardo da Vinci, who's like a creative technologist. He's a front and back end developer, does extraordinary things. We'll tell you more about him. Ari, who's named after Aristotle. He's kind of like he understands our story instincts. He's trained to write in my voice, which is cool. You know, earlier I was like, if you need to go craft out a series, you've got this great practice of where you say 10, 80, 10, where you're like, Harris,
Hmm.
for the first 10, we need you for the last 10. You now, without having to have a password to an LLM that's trained on my voice with a specific project, you can just be in a Slack channel and be like, hey, Ari, if Harris were to write this email in his voice, what would it look like or sound like? And boom, he's
Hmm.
very well trained on lots of learning material. So
Yeah.
it's fun,
It's
man.
amazing.
Very
Yeah.
exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you're listening to this and you're just like, oh my gosh, I don't know where to begin, just like what Harris talked about, we're going to dive into a little bit more about that in the next episode. But also, we have a tool and a resource that you can actually get your hands on that will actually give you, an overview of all 27 agents, who they are, their job title, why we created them, and a little bit about what they do, in hopes that it may just spark some ideas for you to say, okay, hey, here's the one agent or the two agents that I want to create. Again, this is not a how to exactly, you can ask Claude how to do this. But this is the goal is to like inspire, motivate you, think differently about your business if you could. So if you go to astoria.com/AI team, you'll be able to get this resource. You can download it. It'll immediately get sent to you, and we've got some cool things coming after that too, later this month, that are going to help you go deeper in AI. Again, that's Astoria, Istoria.com /AI team. So, Harris, thanks so much for sharing. Any final thoughts before we leave today?
Now I would just circle back to the tension that we started with in the beginning. If you're one of those folks, and I saw a reel the other day on Instagram, and it was a voiceover artist creating this funny video where she was just like, does this sound like every reel you see today? And it was like AI for business, where business uses AI to help you grow your business using AI. It's like just AI and business. Again. So look, guys, I get it. We get it. There's a lot of skepticism. There's lots of uncomfortable, like facts, and some of that is real. Some of it is being exaggerated. There's very real ethical concerns. There's responsibility that has to be in place when you leverage this technology. It is both incredibly powerful and it's not going to take over the world. Humans are amazing and we're going to be the stars of this next chapter of human history. So I would just say, if you're skeptical and you're feeling tension, have an open mind. Have as much of an open mind and heart as you can, and know that I was with you. I am where you are. I still feel the tension. I'm still carrying the tension. I'm trying to navigate this with wisdom and responsibility. And so come on this journey with us with an open mind, stay curious and explore. And you might get to the end and say, man, I heard you out and it's not for me. But if you've heard us out, you will have honored and trusted the process. And so I think just an open mind as we go through these few episodes.
I love it. Thanks for your time. Excited to jump in and continue the dialogue.
Yeah. Thanks for listening, guys. Story of Scale podcast. If you're enjoying it, send this along, send it to a friend. Help us spread the word, and we'll see you again in the next episode. Talk soon.
The Story of Scale podcast is a production of the Istoria studio, recorded on location in Chattanooga, Tennessee at Socially You Studios. For more resources on how to not only scale your business, but live a story worth scaling, visit istoria.com/scale.